Hello all, and my name is Ben Fuller and I am the Arts Coordinator at Mobley High School in South Australia. Welcome to my presentation of teaching music through composition. I'm going to provide you with some details for some middle school and senior school contexts that will be great for both students and teachers.
So hello ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. First thing is down in the bottom left I've got my name, contact details there, so if you'd like anything that you see, please feel free to get in contact with me and I'm happy to share anything that I have. So as I move through the first couple, I'm going to take a look at a Year 8 task that I run. At Modbury High we have a pretty introductory band program, so all students come into Year 8. Most of them have never learnt an instrument before, so we really are at a beginner level, but we're still able to compose music. And I believe that these ACAR achievement standards in particular are very important to focus on. So allowing students to be able to manipulate those elements of music, making sure that when they learn their band repertoire that they can rehearse and perform everything they do on their own and within the ensemble. And then of course also through a range of oral exercises teaching them how to recognise different rhythmic patterns, different pitch patterns that can help them form their compositions as well. And then of course there's the responding to music, which I'll get through in some of the other tasks. So after learning some of our beginner band repertoire, what I do is I get the students to take these ideas and kind of rearrange them into their own compositions. So you can see down below the various kind of note and rhythmic patterns we have. So for example, the following two pieces that we have down here, the first bar is the same across both pieces there. Not only that, but also the rhythmic pattern across both pieces is also identical. So we then have some other following examples here. So for example, in this one here, we can see in the third example, there's a little bit of question and answer phrasing happening here. We've got a question, then we have a little answer, question in the third bar, and then a second answer. But also this repertoire is just gained around a lot of repetition. So this first bar that appears here also appears in the last bar of the first song. And the second bar here also appears in the first part of this song. So already through learning the repertoire, they're learning how to kind of recognise the rearrangement of some of these parts. So here's a little bit of a composition that a student had created, handwritten first. So I use a particular form when I do this. So that I can get that question and answer phrasing happening. So the following structure or form I like to use is an A, B, A, C for the first 4 lines, and D, E, D, and F for the second few. Okay, using technology as a learning tool. I love the use of technology. I mean, I use a lot of Sibelius myself, and I also have a lot of students that use MuseScore, Sibelius, and a range of other programs. But I cannot stress enough the importance of the students to develop those handwritten skills. But incorporating technology can also help them out. So I have students enter their compositions into a music scoring software program after they've shown me their draft, and this allows them to develop some basic skills around the program. But it's also a great way, if they're still one of these students that struggles a little bit with being able to play in time or remember how to play the correct notes, they can use this as a bit of an example so they can listen to their composition, see what it sounds like, play along with it, and improve their playing in their own time. Okay, once they've done all of this, they end up being able to present their composition, and what they need to do is present it as a written score, but then also they have to do it as a performance. So here's an example of one of the students performing their composition. Okay, so within that performance there, we're able to see the form here. So we've got our A, they've developed their A pattern here, they've repeated it in the third bar, then they've got an answering phrase in each one, and the same in the second 4 bars. Here's their little question, followed by their answers. One thing that I also like about this composition is that it uses the same rhythmic idea across the whole composition and then just varying some notes. So I really like the approach that student took there. Okay, now of course we all know as music educators that when we go to run a class or we're running a music program that we will often find students who have already been learning an instrument for a number of years. So with every task that I create, I like to differentiate it and make sure that I'm providing a range of extension activities that can work students to their individual level. So for example, if a student completes that task quickly, here's a number of ways that I like to extend their skills. So first of all, I get them to utilise the same form, but then I get them to make their own choice of rhythmic patterns and notes to create their own compositions. Now that may be notes that they know on their instrument. So some students, for example, have got quite an extended range. Okay, others might be picking up their instrument quite quickly, but they're still working with around about 5 or 6 notes. Okay, so what we can see here is this is a composition that a student had created themselves. So they've got their question bars in bar 1 and 3, answering bars here, and really interesting that same rhythm here in the answering bars. Question bar again, introducing the use of a dotted minim, and then again taking a look here at the answer bars, which there's a lot of similarity between each of the answering bars the student has created, just some different variations of those same kind of note pattern ideas. So this student had actually learnt a number of scales. So what I actually did is I said, well, how about you learn about transposition? And they're like, oh, I don't know what transposition is. So we wrote out the scales. We gave them some scale degree numbers. I talked about some of the note names like tonic, dominant, subdominant. And then I said, okay, I need you to pick one of these other 2 keys to rewrite your piece in. So then they ended up, and we talked about key signatures as well, so then we ended up just doing a straight transposition of it into F major, which was great for their theory development as well as their composition. The final thing that I did with this student is that I wanted them to get a bit more of a technical challenge. By the end of the task, we didn't quite get around to playing it, but the student was able to understand that they had reached a certain level and there's now still that next level of development to go. But the composition was really good. What they did is they took some additional notes and added them to some of the patterns that they already had. And for example, you know, one of the things that we talked about a lot was the use of what we call a surrounding note figure, and also some scalic and stepwise movement. So that was really good because that tends to be a task that I run in year 9, and I'm kind of pushing them ahead and trying to get them ready for that. Okay, there are obviously some times where things don't exactly work out. So this student, I just let him go with it, and he came back with, he had his composition written in 4/4 time. He tried to use a number of different note values, tried to add some rests in there, but he'd forgotten to count up the number of beats in each of the bars. But I decided to kind of flip that around, so I kind of got the whole class together. What we ended up doing is having a little bit of a chat about different time signatures and how we can add up a certain number of beats in each bar. And then instead of actually kind of rewriting his piece in 4/4, he decided to then flip that idea, and he worked out how many beats he had in each bar, and then he put a new time signature at the beginning of each one. So starting with a 6/4 bar, 5/4, 7/4, 6/4, and then he did a little 3/4, 2/4 thing, which could have been another 5/4 bar, but he decided to split it up. And then he finished with 2 bars of 4/4, just to make it nice and simple at the end. So a nice composition there. Okay, now some students are definitely able to take their ideas through to performance. So the student that I have here, she created the melody here on her own. And then we also discussed things such as the use of articulation, phrasing, etc., which she also added as we were developing the performance. Now then we sat down together and we also talked about chords and the key that she was in, like B flat. So we talked about the primary triads and so she went through and worked out the various chords that each of the melodies could go with, and then we decided on those chords together, and then it ends up being a performance at one of our mid-year concerts. So here's what that sounded like. And also they're teaching some of those performance skills as well about working with an accompanist and how to appreciate your accompanist, etc., etc. And that was a fantastic experience for that student. Just as a little bit of an overview, here's a little bit of a marking rubric that I like to use. Of course, I'm focusing here on the achievement standards here, so how students manipulate the elements of music and stylistic conventions to compose. And then, of course, throughout the process, how they're interpreting what they're writing and playing, how they're rehearsing it, performing it, and then how they're able to develop technical skills. Of course, all with that in mind that some of our students have only been learning an instrument for around about 6 weeks to a term when they've actually created that composition. So getting them creative in the first part of their development as a musician, I feel is a fantastic thing to do as well. And there you can just see a little bit of an overview of what the task is. Okay, now then, one of the things that you can actually do is start discussing some of the other elements of music. So, for example, form. So what I did is I took the compositions that the students created and then I decided to use them as a bit of an idea of how we could discuss musical form. So yeah, we discussed things like binary, ternary and rondo. So I've just got a little video here for you to watch to see, and this is just to show you how I go about it in the classroom.
Okay, so today what we're actually going to do is we're going to take some of the staff songs compositions that you guys created and we're going to use them to learn about what we call musical form. Okay? So when we talk about musical form, we are talking about organising sections within a piece of music. So if you think about some of the music that you listen to, what would you know any names of sections of a song? If you had to name a part of a song.
Chorus.
Chorus.
Bridge.
Bridge. Good. That's a good one. Verse. Any others? Yeah.
Punchline. Wait, no.
No, that's a comedic thing. Right. But that's a section of something else. Alright, so we are talking about things like verses, choruses, bridge, outros, instrumentals, etc. In previous days, well actually let's talk about your composition. What was the form that we had to use for the composition that you created? Can anyone remember that? Yeah.
Like A, B, A.
Yeah.
And C.
Yeah.
Next line, D, E, D.
Yeah.
F.
Yeah, that's it. So we basically use letters to get a form or an organisation of musical bars, right? Now that there actually formed 8 bars. So what we're going to learn about today is we now have 8 bar sections and we're going to play some of this music and then we're going to put it into combinations of those 8 bar sections. So, first of all, I just thought I'd see if we can actually guess what the names of some forms might be. Now you need to kind of think in numbers. So the first form that I have is A plus B. So an 8-bar A section, 8-bar B section. Would anyone like to take a guess at what we might call that? What has 2 wheels?
A bike.
Yep. So, right, if I said something is a biannual event, what does that mean?
Happens to.
Well, that means 2, yeah. You're getting there. Yeah, you're getting there, so it's got something to do with 2.
Happens every 2 years.
Happens every 2 years as a biannual event. Right. So we are talking about A plus B, so we've got biannual or bicycle. Right? And what we do is, and here's a word, binary. Has anyone ever heard of binary code before? What's binary code made up of?
0 and 1.
0 and 1, so it's got 2 different things in it, right? So, we are looking at A plus B is binary. So if we take a look on the music that we've got a section A and we've got a section B. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to try and see how we go, because I'm going to combine this with sight reading. So we are going to try and play section A. Right? So let's get our instruments up together. All of section A, instruments up, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Section A. Now, section B. Here we go. Section B. 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Not bad. So, we've done section A, we've done section B. Now we are going to play a binary form. Now the other thing about that for us is now we're actually playing a longer piece of music. The longest piece of music that we've played up to now is 12 bars, first blues, right? Now we're going to 16 bars. So let's see how we feel at the end of it. And then we've got to concentrate. Right? So, A followed by B straight away. Yep. Here we go. Instruments up. 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is binary form. Next form. Oops. Yeah. So we're going to learn another form now. Right? This one is going to be A plus B. But then we're going to put another A on the end. Does anyone want to guess what we might call that?
Non-binary.
Sorry?
ABBA.
ABBA? No, because ABBA would be A, B, B, A. Right.
Trinary.
Actually, okay. All right, let's write that up. Right? Trinary.
Oh.
Well, no, it is not trinary, but you are definitely on the right track. Right?
Triandry.
No,
Trio.
it is 3.
Trilogy.
Well, trio is 3 people, but what we need to do is...
Trilogy. Tenary.
Oh, well, there's some lovely 3 words coming out here.
Trinity. Ternary.
T-E-R, so ternary.
Ternary.
Yeah, so binary is 2 sections, ternary is 3.
For the next part of the presentation, I'm going to move on to something I do with my Year 9s. Now you can take this and do it for Year 9s, possibly Year 10s as well, depending on which aspects of the task you want to include. So basically I take the scale and triad knowledge that I teach them within the first semester, and I get them to apply that to create a composition. So some of the things that we look at creating triads, creating smooth voice leading between the triads. We look at taking that to create some guide tone lines, to do some melody and countermelody writing. We do a few harmonisation exercises, and we also do a little bit of analysis of some melodies and chords as we lead into it, which you'll see in a sec. And the overall idea of the task is that they create an AAB form piece, 32 bars, and if they want to, they can develop into a multi-instrumental work. So one of the first things I like to do is a little bit of a listen to Parker Bell's canon. I like to talk about the different melodic and countermelodic layers that are used in the piece, how it builds, the texture, and then I do a little bit of a brief analysis of the harmonic structure, and I look at 2 of these melodic phrases in detail here that you can see below. So here's some of the questions I like to ask students when we're listening to it. So for example, what types of notes are the melodies actually constructed of? So, and also how do they actually move? Is it stepwise? Is it by small intervals, small leaps, larger leaps? Is it triadic? Are the melody notes derived from a certain scale across the whole melody? Also, we take a look at the individual chords as well, and just take a look and see, are those notes or certain key notes involved in the chord within that progression. So as we actually look at one of these melodies here from Parker Bell's canon, we can see that, you know, this melodic passage here, it uses half notes or minims for its melody. It moves in stepwise movement. It's always moving down or up by a step. All of these notes that are here can be found in the D major scale, and also a majority of them, they all move from the 3rd to the 5th of the chord. So as we take a little bit of a listen to it, we can see that. Start with the 3rd, 5th of the A, 3rd of the B minor, 5th of the F sharp, 3rd of the G, 5th of the D chord, 3rd of the G chord, 3rd of the A chord, and then resolving to the tonic there. So this is just a great way to kind of help break it up and kind of learn what kind of scale knowledge, what kind of chord knowledge do all the kids have. So now we get to their little composition. So I set them a preset harmonic structure. So you can see it down here. So I give them chord 1, chord 4, chord 5 and 1. And then I finish off with a final 4 bars of 6, 4, 5, 1. So that there's some similarity in it, but there's a little bit of difference as well. So that way they can write a number of melodic ideas over a similar progression. So the first thing I do is get the kids to write out the triads in their root position, which you can see down here in the bottom line. We then transfer that to smooth voice leading, and then we create our first guide tone line by picking either the top, the middle, or the bottom layer of that smooth voice progression. And as you can see here, this one is using the middle line. So the next step is we create a minim guide tone line. So this helps to create some more contour that they can have to develop their melody at the final stage. So obviously they need to use another note from the chord, but they're not allowed to repeat the same note that they've already had. So as you can see here, we've got the 5th and the 3rd, we've got the 3rd and the tonic here, 3rd and the tonic here, etc., etc. So and you can also see some contour that's starting to form here that the students will be able to use. All right, now before we do the actual melody step, I do like to do a little bit of a discussion and explanation around some melodic ideas and melodic devices. So for example, you can see here's a melody I've created off my minim guide tone here. I discuss things like passing tones with the students, upper and lower auxiliary notes, surrounding note figures, which are one of my favourites. The fact that you can just use notes of the chord in triadic movement here, having things move up in patterns such as a sequence, and then also we've got our scalic movement, like just moving up and down here, etc. So what I'll actually do is I'll try and make sure that when they're creating theirs, after they've created their first 8 bars, I'll tell them to go back and say, okay, have you got any of these devices in there? Are there any missing? Maybe you could add one. Okay, so after they've learnt about that, and it's time for them to write their own, so I first begin with the first 2 A's. So they've written an A section, which you can see in these 8 bars that are here, and then they do a variation on that. So they just need to make some minor changes. So pretty much you can see here in this student's, they've taken away 1 note in the second bar here for a little variation. Third bar's the same. Here, instead of doing a little interval jump, they've gone a little bit scalic here, left the same, few note changes here, a little change here with a note value, and then also a difference there in the 8th bar as well. So some quite nice little variations there. So they've now created their first 2 A sections. Now, then it's time to take these ideas and put them all back on the student. So what I do is I have them create an alternate B section. So the first thing they have to do is develop their own harmonic progression. For 8 bars, I've just got 4 bars here, and then go through the same process. So write out the triads that are there, put them in smooth voice leading, choose a line, turn it into a minim guide tone line, and then develop a melody. So they go through that whole process that we did, but on their own. And that's really good for me as a teacher to check that they've got their understanding of what we've been going through. So for this student here, you can see that they chose a progression of 1, 5, 6 minor, and then 4. They would have gone through and developed all their lines, and here's what they came up with. And as you would have seen in that previous example, there was a little bit of a piano accompaniment. So this is where I like to provide an extension activity. So because by now they would have actually completed their composition, because they've done their 2 A's, they've done their B section, and for the last A, I just get them to repeat the first A so that they can just get some similarity happening for this piece of music, and it makes them have a sense of accomplishment, that it's kind of like they feel they've done some hard work and the last part's really easy. I do get them to create a little piano accompaniment as a little bit of an extra here. So one of the things is we do an arranging task in the first semester, and we teach them how to write a basic kind of rock and roll bass line. So what I get them to do is transfer using the tonic notes of each triad there to write their little bass line, and then using the notes that they've had in the smooth voice leading, create a little arpeggiated piano accompaniment that will go throughout their composition. So that's a great, nice way of adding one little kind of extension activity. Okay, now we move to some further extension, and this is probably where we're starting to get into. You might be thinking about doing this at a year 10 level. So I had some students that did complete this task quite quickly, and then they did the piano accompaniment quite quickly as well. So I decided to talk to this group of students about doing some countermelody writing. And depending on how they went into kind of 3 or 4 part harmony. So you can see this student went all the way into 4 part harmony. You will also see that I've kept everything in concert pitch just to make it easily to recognize notes against chords. But what this student we talked about was that you've got a melody that's here, and the melody is quite moving in parts and not in others. So when your melody is not moving, your counter melody should. Or vice versa. When your melody is moving, try and have a not so busy counter melody. Then another thing that so you can see how that's kind of happening here between the first and the second. Another thing I discuss with them is about, okay, now try and do some similar motion, contrary motion, oblique motion ideas between the upper part and maybe the lower part. So yeah, we talked about a range of other kind of melodic devices as a way of kind of extending them through the task, and some of those worked quite well. So as I said, this task, it can be used as an introduction to melody writing and composition for Year 9, but it's also effective as a Year 10 task if you want to take some of those previous extension ideas, include them to create a higher level task. You can also, I did have one student who actually went to another level where they actually had created their composition. They did it in numerous parts, so I just went, well, how about we do a theme and variations? So what they ended up doing was creating 2 other variations of their work. And because they were actually a guitarist, we ended up at the end, because they originally had it in B flat major, we ended up transposing it into A major and writing it for a guitar ensemble. And what I'm just going to show you is, here's a copy of, or just a recording of their theme, followed by their variation, which they did in simple triple time for the second one. For the other variation, they did develop some more countermelodic ideas. But here's a copy of their performance and their first variation. Okay, and as Monty Python said, and now for something a little bit different. So sometimes it's actually a good idea to just strip things back and go a little bit simpler. So one of the things that I enjoy doing with my Year 10s in a recent task is doing minimalism. So it actually proved to be quite successful. The first thing we actually did though is we really got into an analysis task because they didn't know much about minimalism at all. So we actually we listened to some works like Trio for Strings by Lamont Young, clapping music by Steve Wright, which kind of phases that rhythmic idea out. And then one of my favourite all-time works, very simple yet very beautiful, is Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Pärt. And so one of the things we did is listen to a range of these works, and we discussed and learnt some of the subject-specific vocabulary. So some of those included things like single tone, static harmony, single beat, steady rhythm, static instrumentation, or just a minimal amount of instruments, phasing, using an additive process, simple dynamics and timbre, whether we have a light or a dense texture, ideas of looping, and then also particularly in relation to the arvo pairt, the broken chords and the brevity, the nice long notes that actually appear there. So, and I guess this helps me focus on language and literacy, which I feel is very important. So not only the subject specific, or what we call the tier 3 language, but also making sure that we can enhance those skills in writing, particularly in the development of sentences and paragraphs. For example, using topic sentence, a definition, providing an example, and then explaining that example. And that helps them develop paragraphs, which eventually they can develop into an analysis essay, which is what we focused on. So what we actually did is we focused on the Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Pärt, and then we basically worked on picking some of those characteristics that we could individually talk about and really drew them out. And this not only was great for their development of their subject-specific language, but also gave them some ideas of how they could focus that when they went to create their own composition, as you'll see coming up. And I have this Year 10 student example here. So this composition is called Requiem for a Dream. So I believe it successfully utilised minimalistic characteristics. He had a repeated ostinato pattern throughout the whole work, and then he had some short little melodic ideas, and he kind of fragmented them, developed them a little bit further, and as you can see in his little introduction to his, so this is the essay that he created, and he did an analysis after his composition. So the same thing that we did for the Arvo Pärt Spiegel im Spiegel, they then had to take those literacy skills and those analysis skills and apply them to their own composition. So Requiem for a Dream is my minimalist composition, which was created by incorporating all that I have learnt about the minimalist style and its aspects and elements over the last term. Strategic use of minimalistic elements throughout the composition leads to a soft, smooth, flowing, simplistic composition. Requiem for a Dream is a piano and vibraphone duet in the unique key of F sharp major, which I thought would be very hard for him to perform. We never got round to performing it, but and it's at 75 BPM in 3/4 time or simple triple time. Characteristics that appear within my minimalist composition include single rhythm, static harmony, additive process, dynamics, and texture. The aim of this analytical essay is to analyse and break down the key features and characteristics of the minimalistic style to understand how they were utilised and applied throughout my composition, Requiem for a Dream. And here is a version of Requiem for a Dream for you to listen to. So, as you can see, quite an effective piece that was written by the student there. So, then after that, obviously, we had the analysis essay. So, he continued on with his analysis there, focusing on aspects such as the structure, single rhythm, static harmony, additive process, dynamics, and texture. So, some of the things I liked about his analysis essay was that he talked in particular about the single rhythm and static motif harmony played by the piano from beginning to end, that you would have noticed that it's just there all the time, and the little melodic ideas kind of change around that. Also talking about the fact that it only consisted of semiquavers in the treble line and dotted minims in the bass line, and how the notes are ascending, etc. So talking about the bass line using perfect fifths, keeping it nice and open, and I like how the bass line moves, but the right hand of the piano stays the same, and that therefore kind of alters the harmony enough, but not too much. So yeah, I really like the example that the student gave here. Furthermore, he talked about some additive process there, so it talks about the vibraphone melody pattern. Particularly the bit where he talked about, he had a little phrase and then he repeated it again later, but he did it in octaves. So once again, keeping the kind of unison idea there, so and not varying it too much. Obviously the dynamics and texture, he used a lot of soft dynamics, and because of only the two instruments, it was quite thin in texture there. And then just to finish it off, within his conclusion, he just made really strong connection to the understanding of the stylistic characteristics there, and he did really well in his analysis task, and he was actually really effective at being able to show those transfer of skills from just an analysis task to analysing his own composition. And it was really good to hear him say that he thought that there were some aspects of it that kind of strayed away from the some of the stricter minimalistic style things that were in there, but it was great to see him kind of really discuss that in his conclusion. Okay, so getting just to some real life applications, I guess I enjoy composing and arranging music myself, whether that's just for my school bands or professional ensembles. And I like to, I believe that it's very important that we should be sharing what we are doing out in the real world with our students. It just helps to give them some context of it. So that's one of the things that I definitely like to do, and then I like to have a bit of a discussion about it as well. So I like to discuss how I've used melody, how I've used countermelody, how I've used texture, why do I choose some of the different instruments I use, why do I write for some of the ensembles that I do. So just I show them a couple of little ideas that we have here. So this is just one of the little compositions that I had, and I just talked to them about the use of chords, and particularly with my year 9s I start to get in to talk about extensions of chords, and now talking about a 4-part chord rather than a 3-part chord. I can discuss aspects of kind of contrary motion and similar motion here as well. And then in another piece that I have, once again I can talk about how I'm harmonising together. A little bit of oblique motion here with some long notes and then some question and answer phrasing, which is really good. And then I also get into writing for larger ensembles. So for example, this piece here that was written for a big band, I talk about the reasoning behind why I used the trumpets here. And I've got my little melody happening with the trumpets, answering phrases here happening by the saxophones, etc., and how they complement each other. So this is just a little short snap of what that sounds like. I also talk about that little ostinato rhythm that's happening there in the guitar, just that little repeated rhythm there, just how that helps to create a kind of nice little balance in the backing and something regular. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Once again, my details are down the bottom there. So Ben Fuller, you can call me at my school or you can send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. If you got something out of today, that's great. If you've been trying something similar at your school, I'd love to hear from you to see what you're doing as well. And let's get kids composing and enjoying the creation of music. Enjoy the rest of your conference.